the year of the codec. Let's talk about why that is. Hi, this is James Gardner with CineTechGeek, and in this vlog I want to talk about the year of the codec, as I'd like to call it. So why do I call this the year of the codec? Well, there's been a lot of development in codecs in the last year or so, and in recent months there's been a lot of changing and manoeuvring by the big companies. Now today I'm not going to talk about the technical side much of the codec, but the manoeuvring of what companies are doing and how the industry's taking on board all these new codecs that are coming. In reality, there's not been a lot of change. The cameras are the same, they're still producing the same codecs. Apple's got its codec, etc., and all of the camera manufacturers have their specific codecs, which are specific to their CC or the chips and how they read, and that's why there's all these codecs, because they all have a little bit of slightly different designs, etc., and they have their own little codecs to take as much advantage of them as possible. And there's been moves in recent years via SMPTE, for example, to make something that should answer all those needs, such as VC5. But VC5 has failed to take off. It's ratified now, but there's very little movement there. And what have we seen in the last couple of months? Well, Apple all of a sudden has decided to make ProRes available on Windows. Why have they changed their story there? There must be a cause, there must be a reason. Also, Apple has deprecated lots of older codecs, making old projects incompatible, for example, with your upgraded editing systems of the future. Oh man, that's a big problem. That's going to cost a lot of money to overcome in some way, shape or form. These are a lot of changes. There's been a lot of manoeuvring. So, people are saying, oh, this is great, but no one's really given us a good reason why this is happening. And I don't know exactly why, but I have some theories as to why, and I want to just put them and throw them out there and see what you think. Now, obviously, in a lot of my videos in the past, I've put a lot of effort in informing people about IMF. IMF is basically a new deliverable format that's suitable for the era of streaming services, making it so you deliver those formats in a way which is most suitable for streaming and all the auxiliary components, making it so you don't have to render things multiple times, saving time and money for everyone. But these standards are mostly revolved around open standards like JPEG 2000, which obviously, if you're in cinema, you know that DCPs are supplied in JPEG 2000. So that's a big development of moving away from ProRes, etc., which is pretty much the standard until recently for delivering content, to non-proprietary standards. So there's been a lot of pressure there, I think, on Apple, and that's some of the reasons why this has changed. So to combat that, Apple has done a number of things. They've done the RDD, or they've basically made it, which I'm not a big believer in, they've made it so you can put RDD or decode ProRes in an IMF, but that's it. You can't. It's not completely part of the standard. They've just sort of tacked it on the side and tried to get an officially making ProRes part of that family of deliverables. But I don't think the industry is going to really adopt that too much. They've got open standards which are as good, if not better. They're older, they're more developed, they've got better mathematics behind them. ProRes is very old. And there's also other things such as VC5. VC5 is basically a standardized version of Cineform, and if you've got any knowledge in codecs and quality of these mezzanine codecs for production, VC5 or Cineform is actually known to be better quality than ProRes. But it hasn't really succeeded. Now, why hasn't VC5 succeeded? Well, it's an interesting story. Let's talk about that for a second. Now, I believe going forward, a lot of successful companies are not using patents to control the industry, or they're either abandoning their patents or pouring these good technology in the industry as a way of forging goodwill on top of good technology, on top of good engineering, and lifting those companies up. An example of that is Blackmagic, for example. They introduced a new form of RAW recently. It's been in beta for a while, but I feel that's another big reason why this is happening. They haven't only introduced this new form of RAW, their patent and licensing, from my understanding, for this new version of RAW is very open. Anyone can adopt it. There's not really any licensing issues, they're going to let theoretically their competitors could add it to their cameras as well. So the object here is to put this into the cameras to make sure that that acquisition is easy to do and easy to move around. So there's a lot of movement there. But and also recently Apple decided to make ProRes available on all platforms. Why? What's changed? Apple went out of their way to make a bastard child of ProRes, so you could only decode it. They would have had to have gone out of their way to do that. I remember talking to some Apple people and saying, "Oh no, it's because of the licensing." I'm sorry, but dude, as a developer myself, making something which is a half-done product takes more effort than making the product properly. Usually, especially when you've already got a cooked product and you're porting it across. So they've intentionally done this. And so if they've intentionally done it, there's reasons behind it, and I like to say, look at what people do, not what they say. So just why would they have done that? Of course, there's strategic reasons to keep their, the walled garden effect of production. And they've done a very good job over the years, and it's been very successful for them. But things are changing. Netflix and the streaming people, they're wanting to go to these open standards. Now, why is that the case? Well, Apple again has made a good example just in recent months when they've deprecated a lot of the 32-bit codecs into their operating system. So what does this mean? Well, it means that if you've got some old projects, you won't be able to load them anymore on your currently loaded editing solution. Can't load them, there's no way. They're not going to go back and port them. They're not going to go back and release them because there's costs involved and there's also other bits and pieces. But if those codecs were all based around open standards at the time, if FFmpeg, for example, is a Swiss Army knife of codec implementation. If the qualified and working implementations of those codecs were part of FFmpeg, people wouldn't be so worried. But that's unlikely to happen. These companies are unlikely to release this information because it's just not worth their time. So here we are down the track, and if you're a big Netflix or other content owner who has access or owns all this content and wants to reuse it in the future, you don't want this legacy licensing issues dragging you back. And that's why there's been a big push by Netflix and all these other streaming producers and all big producers who own content to push away the use of proprietary codecs. And it is this pressure that has fallen upon Apple and ProRes. And this is my opinion, but this is why I think they're putting ProRes onto all platforms, allowing that to happen. And also they wanted to do that as, push that out there, saying we're allowing things to happen, but then they come and bring in all this deprecated stuff and chop that off because they knew they wanted to get rid of it, and they want to sort of get past that bad reputation hit from doing that move, and putting ProRes forward for that. There's other aspects of this I wanted to put forward. That the pressure there is also. Let's look at another thing. So VC5 is a standard. It's basically Cineform pushed into a SMPTE standard and put out there so it could be used. Now VC5 is a great codec. It's got some great capabilities with RAW as well, but it hasn't happened. Now why is that? Well, VC5 is really driven from the camera manufacturer GoPro. Now they were doing a good job. They were very successful for a number of years. They were flying, they were going straight up, they were doing a good job. Their cameras are great. I really like their cameras too, but they've got a lot of competition. They've hit a lot of headwinds. So their freedom to allow that sort of codec out there, etc., and the board is sort of turned around. So anything we've got, we want to make some money about it because we're not in good shape anymore. Now, why did they do it in the first place? Well, I believe any good company who's doing a good job should lead by example, should lead by good engineering, should lead by the fact they're giving the industry products that they want and they're making money from doing so. And holding like a really good codec to the chest and saying, "It's ours, it's mine," and you can use it if you use our products. That sort of attitude is not working properly or well in the industry today. And the open source technologies are working out pretty much just as good anyway, and you haven't got the lock-in in the future. And as such, there's pressure from above, I think, saying, we prefer to use these codecs, etc., especially Netflix, etc., who are actually dictating down, like what sort of codecs they prefer people to use and the reasons why, and that's having a big effect. But VC5 really hasn't taken off because there is a patent connected with the Bayer part of it, and really VC5 really flies free when we talk about compressing Bayer information and the high dynamic range and all that sort of stuff. Now that's held it back, and therefore I don't think it's really going to fly. And so there's been other aspects or other movements into other parts with Simply, and I'll get into that in a minute. So there's an example of how you can use a very good technology, and giving it out there or holding it in has an effect on the company and the industry as a whole. So just keep that in mind. So Apple changes, we'll go back to Apple. So Apple in the past has made, ProRes has been available from certain little manufacturers, but strangely after they all disappear without an email to be returned. It's a bit of a coincidence if you ask me. And then in recent years, you've seen Apple allow their decoder, so tools like Windows could decode their software. Like I said before earlier, listen to what companies do, not what they say. But I think it was disingenuous to make it available for decoding only. It was a form of walled garden and not a very friendly thing to do, trying to keep everyone into the Apple ecosystem. But the truth is, the Apple ecosystem is no longer what everyone wants to live in, but they have a very dominant codec at the same time. I think it's rubbed a few, especially a number of color graders I know, the wrong way. And so what's happening now? So the example of Apple deprecating some of their old 32-bit codecs has really made it really upfront and put it into people's faces that using proprietary codecs can have a very big detrimental effect as if you're a content owner, based on what that content can do in the future. An example, you have an old project, which is an old Final Cut Pro, pre-Final Cut Pro 10 using old 32-bit codecs. And you have an opportunity, you need to bring that project back to the future because you're using it for a documentary or something that's very, very important. And you're in a modern editing system. You get that old project and you bring it forward, and pretty much you can't. Some codecs which aren't compatible with the future operating system. Oh, okay, well, how do we decode them from the old to the new? Well, you'll have to get an old computer somehow. Do they exist anymore? And load the old operating system on it. It's one way. You could use ProRes. Oh, not ProRes. You could use FFmpeg, the Swiss Army knife. But is it a certified decoder? Is it going to give you the same pixels that you got in the original product? Probably not. Doesn't matter really if you might be color grading again, but there's all these questions that as a content owner you don't want to think about. So there's all these sort of pressures going on. And finally, let's talk about, I think, one of the bigger reasons why Apple may be shifting gear. One of the biggest powerful aspects of codecs, or the use of codecs, is in acquisition. Cameras have the codecs built into them, so you're building them into the chips inside the camera. That's not trivial. That's a big deal, right? So you license the stuff from Apple and you bake it into the chip of the camera, so when it records to a ProRes or a RAW or some form like that. Apple has really landed well in terms of, apart from the RAW codecs, everyone seems to have landed on the ProRes for everything else, especially the 8-bit stuff, even some of the 12-bit stuff. But in the future of high dynamic range in Cinema 2.0 or in domestic content itself, we need to move over to a completely new way of using codecs. Now, Apple obviously came up with their Apple RAW or ProRes RAW, which to me is it's an abomination, really, because it's not real RAW. And it's more of a marketing trick than a real RAW codec, because part of the RAW codec is that you are recording the content directly off the chip, but you're recording it in a way where the metadata and how you use that data is variable. You can change the way that it's exposure, etc., in the metadata before it comes into the system. ProRes throws all that away and cooks it in. Is it really a RAW if you throw away that capability? I don't think so. But now you've got, again, that's an example of Apple dancing the dance and looking like it's doing the right thing for disingenuous reasons, if you ask me, because it's not really doing what it should do. But now we've got Blackmagic. Now Blackmagic has done very well over the last couple of years. They're doing good technology. People are loving it. They're leading by, they lead because they make good products at good prices, what people want. They don't try and proprietary things up. They typically go for open sort of solutions. And one of these new solutions is their new RAW system that they're bringing out. It's in beta now, but it is truly a very inspiring implementation, because if we all are going to high dynamic range recording, keeping stuff in RAW is where we need to be. So having a RAW codec, which has got the speed and capabilities of our typical 8-bit codecs that we use today, or 10-bit codecs, and having the same disk space with the raw capabilities, 12-bit, blah 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 blah, and having the same disk space and everything, man, that's going to make it be a big deal, and especially if they make that codec available to everyone. So that you can be put on Panasonic cameras, on Sony cameras, etc., to still feed all into the chain that they have for their production workflow. Their cameras as well, of course. But if you have the freedom to take advantage of all that, that's fantastic. Especially, they have also got some patents there, but they're going to let people use it for free, and they've patented it to a degree for protection more than to wall it off. Not to wall it off so much, but to protect it from other people trying to patent it. That's my gut feeling. But its implementation is inspiring. It's fantastic. It's like my brother did I'm talking about 30 years ago, my brother was doing a lot of animation creation for using Amigas to make gambling kiosks, etc. And back in those days, animation didn't really exist, so he made what we call bit plane stack, or what he called bit plane stack, which was back in those days, the way the codecs used was very much on a layer by layer, bit plane layer by layer, and he compressed it down to made animations, etc. It's complicated, but what is interesting about that technology is that it's very relevant to how we store RAW. And when we talk about how Blackmagic's new codec works in terms of it half debays the content before it saves it off, basically mean it's using it, in our opinion, not that we've talked to them, it debays it into bit planes and then uses the color engines on the bit plane, so you've half debayed it before you're actually cooking it in the computer, making it run as fast as the computer can run with the speed, etc., of what we expect with current ProRes type codecs, but you've got raw capabilities. Now that's going to be a big thing, and I expect that codec may get some significant adoption in the future. But anyway, that's codecs, and why I consider it the year of the codec, because there's a lot of stuff happening in codecs, but it's not actually affecting a lot of people yet. But the people in the know and understand the costs of using all these things, there's a cost in every decision you make. Like, the main reason Apple has done so well is because codecs are a means to an end. And as a creative who's trying to do things the fastest and with the most cost effectiveness, ProRes is the way to go currently, because it gives you that. And you want the technology to get out of the way. You all creativity, because that's what you've been paid to do. It's the right choice. But if you can do the same thing and get better tools that give you just as much creativity or more because of the color capabilities of these newer codecs, and it doesn't have the legacy proprietary pitfalls, what are you going to do? You're going to learn about them. You're going to probably adopt them in the near future. And I feel that Apple and a lot of the more industry-knowing people who are, that's all they do every day, are talking about that today and talking about going in those directions in the near future. So keep an eye on those topics if you find this geeky topics interesting and the business aspects of it. So yeah, that's one of my vlogs for this year, one of my first. I hope you enjoyed the discussion, and bye for now. From James Gardner, the CineTechGeek.